It's a real pleasure today to have a chat with Mark Meckler from the Convention of the States. I've known Mark for many years. Mark, he had an accomplished career before this, but he was a co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, and as such, made his bones overnight, forming one of the most powerful grassroots organizations in history, which he and Jenny Beth Martin did overnight. We honored him at one of the MRC galas, and we've just completed another gala where Mark was a presenter, and we had a whole lot of fun. So first, Mark, let me welcome you with this Facebook chat that we're having, because I've got some questions to ask you.
Yeah, look, it's great to be with you. It was great to be with you at the gala. It brought back a lot of memories of the early days of the Tea Party. And one thing I got to throw out there, Brent, I remember back in the heady days of the Tea Party, and a lot of Tea Party folks kind of felt like they were the first conservatives ever to exist in the world. Kind of drove me crazy. And for me, one of the great honors was meeting you, somebody who'd been around for so long and who had built the conservative movement, and frankly, on whose shoulders we stood. So being back with you at the gala again, that was a real treat for me.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. True story. There was, and there continues to be, a meeting that is called the Conservative Action Project, where a small but very prominent group of conservative leaders meet. I will never forget the one Wednesday morning we met, and the discussion was this Tea Party rally that was taking place that weekend. And I swear to God to you, Mark, this is true. We all sat around this table looking at each other saying, "Are you the one doing it?" "No, no." "Are you the one doing it?" "No, not me. I thought it was you." "Are you the one doing it?" We didn't know. That's how grassroots this really was. It was not any of us who, by the way, I hate it when somebody calls himself a leader. It was not any of us in Washington, D.C. who had done it. It was you guys. Okay, so Convention of the States, I think is one of the most important initiatives in the country today. First thing I want to ask you to do is explain it.
So look, everybody knows, anybody who's watching this knows Washington, D.C. is out of control. One of the things we've been doing over and over as conservatives for a very long time, as long as I've been paying attention to politics, my first vote was for Ronald Reagan. I was 18 years old, is we send the best people we can, the best people we can find, and the best people we can elect to Washington, D.C., and we hope they're going to change things. And if there's one thing that we've learned over the decades since I've been paying attention to politics is nothing changes. Ever since Washington's administration, the first administration, government has grown under every single presidential administration, the only exception being Coolidge. The Reagan administration grew government, which is extraordinary. The true conservative, it puts Bennett in to shrink or get rid of the Department of Education. It's bigger when he leaves. And so we keep doing this and hoping for a different result. It's not going to work. And the founders knew that this was going to be the case. They gave us a mechanism in Article 5 of the United States Constitution. And they said, look, if it ever gets to the point where the federal government's unresponsive, we're going to allow the people acting through the states to call a convention of states to propose amendments to the Constitution to restrain federal tyranny. So that's the mechanism in Article 5 that we're using. A Convention of States Action that I head is the organization heading this up around the country. It takes 2/3 of the states to call a convention, 34 states. So far, 19 states have done so. And I would say we're really on the cusp, 15 states to go. But today, 31 states have both houses controlled by Republicans. I think that'll be 33 after this upcoming election. So we're almost at the requisite number 34. And then the goal of the convention, what the convention is being called for specifically, is to propose amendments imposing term limits on Congress and federal officials. So that would mean bureaucrats and staffers as well, what we now know as the deep state. Impose a balanced budget amendment or other fiscal restraints on the federal government, like tax caps or spending caps. And finally, and I think most importantly, impose scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government to say, no, we realize the courts have expanded your power, but we're going to take that power back. You can't be involved in education. You can't be involved in you can't be involved in environment. All things that were originally left to the states that the federal government has now taken, we intend to take that power back. So that's the basics of how an Article 5 convention works.
You know, it's, you got to say this. The size of government exploded under George Bush 43, and we were horrified by it. But then came Obama, and he doubled or tripled down on the debt or whatever it was, and we thought that this was deadly. Along came Donald Trump. He was even worse. We got to be honest with it. He was even worse than Obama with this spending. And now Biden. And you know, Mark, what frightens the dickens out of me is that everybody is saying it's the spending that's destroying the economy. But guess what? The spending is out of control itself. There's nothing that's reining in spending. Matter of fact, Paul Ryan, I remember when he was brought in as the fiscal conservative to make sense of this, he came up with a budget that had deficit spending as far as the eye could see. So something's got to give. You either have to change this dramatically, or I think we go to fiscal ruin, because there's nothing slowing that out of control spending train. What is, Mark, what's your answer to those who say, well, you open up the Pandora's box at that point and all sorts of nastiness can happen if you have a convention? What's your response?
Let me start with the end game, which is that the framers were geniuses of structure, and they understood human nature and structure incredibly well. And the structure of a convention of states is set up so that nothing like that could possibly pass. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So 34 states to call a convention. The states have to agree in advance what they're going to talk about. So there are rails for the convention. But let's presume that the naysayers are correct. They're not. We could talk about that, but presume they are. Convention gets out of control. It takes 26 states to make a suggestion. That's really important, the word suggestion. A convention, its only power is to make suggestions. I've never been afraid of any meeting where people are going to gather to make suggestions. If they make a suggestion, that suggestion goes out to the states, and the states have to ratify it. 3/4 of the states, that's 38 states. So here's the challenge for people who are afraid of this. I hear all the time, Brent, my one that I hear most often is we're going to lose the Second Amendment. Now, my mom was a law enforcement officer, retired as a deputy sheriff. My son's a Marine. We love our guns around here. We're great defenders of the Second Amendment. We'd never put it at risk. Chuck Cooper, who I know you know well, long-serving outside counsel for the NRA, litigating on behalf of the Second Amendment, is on my legal advisory board. He says it's ridiculous. But the most important reality around this is just the numbers. It takes 38 states to ratify. So if you think about that, if you're talking 38 states, that means it takes only 13 states to stop any amendment that we wouldn't want. Now, today, there are 24 states that have constitutional carry, meaning you don't need a permit to carry your weapon. There are 24 states where you can carry your handgun inside the state capitol. I've done it in many of them. I travel armed wherever I can. There are 14 states where you can carry a loaded long gun, your AR, with one in the chamber, sling it over your shoulder, and sit in the gallery. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but you can do it. The idea that we couldn't find 13 states to stop an amendment that has a negative effect on the Second Amendment is just ridiculous. And I've challenged conservatives all over the world, like you, I know people like Hannity and Shapiro and Beck and all these guys have been on all those shows. I give out my personal email address, which I'll do here. It's mmeckler@cosaction.com. If somebody can name an amendment that you or I wouldn't like and list the 38 states that would ratify that, I'm happy to get on the phone with them and have a conversation. I've made that offer for 9 years. I've never received a single email. It's just impossible to ratify something that you or I wouldn't like.
So who are some of the conservative leaders that are behind you? Besides me, but I don't like calling myself a leader. But besides me, because I'm fully endorsing you, who are some of the leaders who are behind you?
Yeah, look, so if you look at the conservative movement, broadly speaking, and you can say this generically, first of all, which is every single nationally known conservative, leader or not, nationally known conservatives, you're in that category, who has opined on this, has opined positively. There literally are no nationally known conservative leaders who've opined negatively. There's one exception I'll give you. She has since passed away, God rest her soul. That's Phyllis Schlafly. But look, Limbaugh was not an endorser, but he spoke positively about it. Mark Levin wrote an entire book about it. He's one of our greatest supporters. Ben Shapiro is an endorser. Glenn Beck is an endorser. Steve Deace is an endorser. Pete Hegseth at Fox and Friends is an endorser. And the list goes on and on and on. And so there literally isn't anybody that I know of that's a nationally known figure that opposes it. And it's important to know who does oppose it. And that is people who signed a press release, organizations signed a press release 5 years ago on Good Friday. Over 230 leftist organizations led by Common Cause and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, both Soros-funded policy orgs, put together a joint press release. It was signed by La Raza and MoveOn.org and Planned Parenthood. Hillary Clinton has spoken out against this. Just in the last 2 weeks, Russ Feingold, the former senator, Democrat senator from Wisconsin, a socialist senator, one of the most leftist senators ever to serve in the U.S. Senate, he wrote an entire book against Convention of States. So all the America-hating, baby-killing, communist, socialist organizations in America are against it. All the conservatives are for it. As I said, the only exception was Phyllis Schlafly, the founder of Eagle Forum, and if you like, we can go into why she was against it.
I think it's just remarkable. This is one more indication of the far left knowing America doesn't support it. If America supported all those initiatives on the left, they'd have no concern with this, would they? In fact, the Convention of the States would do nothing but kind of ratify whatever they believe in, if they truly believed that they had the support of the public. What this is, I used to think it was a little bit overwrought talking about the swamp and the deep state, etc. But there really is a swamp, and there really is a deep state, and they inside the Beltway. They control the axis of power. Culturally, they control the axis of power. The only thing they don't control is the American people. And to me, it's remarkable with the billions of dollars that they're unleashing every single year. Billions with a B of dollars they're unleashing on every front. They still can't capture the American people. I think the Convention of the States is so critical. Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, right? That was the name of it. Yeah. I recommend to everyone that you read it, because I think it's whether you agree with his amendments or not, it's irrelevant. I think he makes the case as well as anybody I've ever seen about how this government is out of control. And his newest book about American Marxism tells you the people behind that government that's out of control. And to me, it's very, very frightening. So they're coming after you. There are news reports coming after you. It's very easy to say, well, that's just pat yourself on the shoulder. That shows you're being effective, yada, yada, yada. But when somebody's been in your shoes, that's not as easy as that. What's going on?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And look, we've had our share of opponents over the years. I've been doing this 9 years now. We've built an organization of over 5 million people, the largest activist organization in America right now. And so I'm used to the attacks. It doesn't surprise me to be attacked. But this is really surprising, or I should say, just an escalation of what's been going on. Just in the last 6 weeks, we had Business Insider do a major hit piece on us, a leftist business magazine. I don't know how those two things go together, but they are. We have had the AP come after us and do a hit piece on us. They don't like us, Brent, because we're participating in state level elections all across the country. We'll be participating in over 450 elections this year. They don't like what we're doing in the state legislatures, making them more conservative, more supportive of the rights of the states and the rights of the people. So we've got AP coming after us, MSNBC coming after us, Vice Magazine coming after us. It's pretty much a who's who. And then just in the last couple of weeks, as I said, Senator Russ Feingold wrote this book. That book received coverage on ABC Primetime News. I was blown away. A 15-minute interview talking about how dangerous it is for the country to have a convention of states. It received glowing coverage in the New York Times. So we're seeing as the entire leftist apparatus rise up against convention of states. And you mentioned something really important. I get a lot of emails from people saying to me, man, congratulations, Mark. It shows you're right over the target. And I appreciate people saying that. Look, I know I'm over the target. We've got the holes in the wings to show we're right over the target. We're okay, but we are right over the target. But when people say that, what I wish they would say, and I hope they'll say afterwards, is how can we help? Because when you've got somebody in the conservative movement right over the target, we all need to rally. And this is something you know from doing this for many decades, which is when one of ours is coming under attack by the left, we need to rush in and support.
That's right.
That's been a philosophy I've always believed in. I know that's been your philosophy all along as well.
Which is why I was scared to death of the Roe v. Wade decision. Not that we would lose, but that we would win. because that would unleash the ultimate fury of the radical left, because abortion is ground zero for them, and every organization would rally around their side, and our side wasn't prepared, and that's exactly what happened. And what we're seeing is the Republican Party head for the tall grass, which I think is a despicable proposition, because then when they go back to their states, every single one of them will give a speech about how pro-life they are, and it frankly disgusts me. But going back to the Convention of the States and going back to the attacks on you, the one word that we've not raised, the IRS. You know the IRS issue because of your days in the Tea Party, probably as well as anyone. Speak, if you would, about what you believe to be the threat of the IRS.
Yeah, look, I know it and I feel it viscerally. Back in the days of the Tea Party, we experienced the targeting of the IRS against Tea Party groups. In fact, we funded the only class action litigation against the IRS. It's the only class action litigation I'm aware of that the IRS has ever settled, ever paid money, $3.7 million to settle. I don't think that was enough. Lois Lerner's not in jail. All the people who assisted her are not in jail, but that's how it ended up. And so what we experienced was this direct targeting. They created these BOLO lists, be on the lookout lists, for anybody with the name Tea Party or Constitution in their group's names, and they went after those groups and they went after them hard, denying them their C3 or C4 status, asking them unconstitutional questions about who their donors were, content of their prayers, what books they were reading. So we've experienced the full force of that, and I've been with hundreds and hundreds of people that have personally experienced it. Like Brent, they came after me personally because I was helping to fund this litigation. And literally, we had to hire our own counsel separate from the counsel for the class. It was over $50,000. And they were just trying to get us to stop funding it, was the whole goal. So this was the DOJ, the attorneys for the DOJ. So I'm very familiar with all these people. So when they say that they're going to put $80 billion plus into the agency, double it, add 87,000 agents, will now have 165,000 employees, the idea that they're just going to target big corporations and wealthy people is absurd. What they're going to do is they're going to target their political enemies like they've done for a long time. And among those enemies are going to be you and I and regular Americans, people who voted for Donald Trump, people who give money to conservative candidates. They're not gentle about this stuff. They're very obvious about it. And I'm certain, absolutely 100%, that that's what these agents are going to be used for.
Yep, and well, we're already seeing it. This out of the Justice Department. Look at all these subpoenas that are flying everywhere for anyone who worked for Donald Trump. You know, and I don't know, Mark, that people can appreciate it enough that when you get a subpoena like that, you now have to hire a personal lawyer. So people are being put under the gun. Either cooperate or we destroy you and destroy your family. Or, you know, so you do what we tell you to do. I think also where the IRS is concerned, do you remember Rosemary Woods in the Nixon administration? You know, it was that infamous 18 and a half minutes of audio tape that she, quote unquote, accidentally erased with her foot while she was typing. 18 and a half minutes. How many thousands of emails at the IRS were destroyed and computers physically demolished? And I think it was 33,000 emails with Hillary Clinton bleached. They're out of control. These people are out of control while hiring goons to go after people. It's not just prosecution, it's persecution of conservatives.
Yeah,
So
and Brent, I want to
understand
add very specifically, and I think this was underreported a few weeks ago, the woman who was the chief of staff to the acting director during all that IRS debacle, she was just named as the person to oversee these 87,000 new agents.
Stunning.
So she was literally there at the top of the food chain at the IRS while we were being targeted. And this is the way of the left. If you target conservatives and you work in an agency and you get caught for doing that, there's some sort of scandal, ultimately what will happen is you will find yourself with a promotion at that or another agency, because targeting people on the right is what the federal government does best now.
Yeah, and I will not forget the look of the FBI agents who had to testify in Republican-led committees with smirks on their face, with arrogant smirks on their face, believing, rightfully so, that they were above the law, and they are. So when people tell you that the deep state is overwrought, as I thought it once was, it ain't so. Okay, final question, Mark Meckler. In Mark Meckler's perfect world, what does government look like?
Yeah, to me, Brent, what it looks like is what the founders intended, which is that the federal government lives according to and under the limits of the 17 enumerated powers granted by the Constitution. Today, it seems like it's 17 million powers. That power goes back to the states, back to the people. It's really interesting. If you look at every state, they have a Department of Education and Energy and Agriculture. Why do we have all those departments in Washington, D.C. as well? We were never intended to have that. In fact, this classic argument that we all know of if you studied the Constitution and our country's history between Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton, of course, was the quote unquote big government guy. He was the urban guy. Jefferson was the agriculturalist. He was the rural guy. But they agreed on something pretty fundamental. It's what they called exclusive spheres of influence. They said if the federal government could do something, then a state couldn't. And if a state government could do something, the federal government couldn't. They couldn't imagine a situation where you would be subject to the regulatory schemes and the legal schemes of both the federal government and the state government on the same thing. They thought it would be impossible for men to exist under such a scheme. So that's where we live today. I would say we use a convention of states. We take the powers away from the federal government that weren't granted to it under the enumerated powers. We give those back to the states, and then we let people work it out in the states.
Mark, I have to say that if someone were to come to me and say that the Convention of the States is the most important initiative of the conservative movement, I'd be hard-pressed to disagree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brent. I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.